in fact, in India, food prices have been going up for now 4 years, and since 2007, they've gone up by about 70%. And this is at a time when workers' wages haven't gone up at all, actually, for most of the country. So we've had a very, very severe food crisis, and it continues. Yeah, when you think about it, the medium-term food crisis is really a result of the agrarian crisis that we've been having from the mid-1990s onwards. And that is entirely a public policy created crisis. It means that what happened across the developing world is that we were all told we should open our markets to international trade, and we should withdraw, or the state should withdraw from actually protecting farmers, providing inputs, doing research and development, doing public investment. So across the board, we had a reduction in public investment in terms of research and development. So we didn't follow up on what are the new kinds of pests that are disturbing farmers, or what kind of new inputs they need, or what kind of sustainable agriculture is required. We didn't give them the knowledge support that they needed because we cut down on those public institutions. We didn't give them the marketing support that they needed, and we removed minimum support prices. It's something the WTO also told us, that you shouldn't be having that kind of thing. We removed subsidies on irrigation and on power and a whole range of things. So costs went up for farmers. But meanwhile, global prices were very volatile. And of course, to begin with, they were very affected by the continuing subsidies in the north, including in the United Kingdom and Europe, as well as the United States. So the prices remained low for a while and then got very volatile. Input prices kept rising and rising and rising. So farmers were absolutely caught. And farming has really become unviable in a large part of the world. That means that they are less interested in growing food grain. They're just trying to find which high-value crop they can somehow, make some money on, because it's really not viable. So we have made it actually more difficult to have a viable food economy. Well, there are two different tracks that we have to operate on. One is the real economy track, that is to make agriculture viable again and to make food production viable and sustainable, using technologies that don't destroy the land, don't pollute the environment and so on. And that is something that requires a lot of public policy intervention. So developing countries have to be allowed to do that, encouraged to do that, helped to do that. But there is another which has to do with the short-term management, and as well as the fact that a lot of the recent price volatility was because of financial speculation in the commodity markets. And this has been allowed by the financial deregulation that let in a whole lot of people who are not actually interested in those commodities. Index traders, hedge funds, pension funds, banks, etc., to enter the commodity market. We have to actually do something to prevent that speculation. Because if we don't do that, then the real economy measures will never get a chance to work. Well, in general, developing Asia suffered much less from the global crisis. We were really affected by the export fall in 2008 and 2009, but then we recovered relatively quickly. What has happened is that employment hasn't recovered. India, China, we never had a fall in output. We had a slowdown in the growth, which is different. But still, employment was very badly affected. And that employment hasn't recovered. So many, many millions of people are still without jobs or with very, very fragile and uncertain employment and much lower wages. And that is going to take a very long time and a different pattern of growth for that to change. On the other hand, we didn't have financial crisis because we had better regulated banking systems to some extent. Unfortunately, in India, that is being seen as a reason to deregulate the banking system. So we are asking for trouble. We're kind of saying, hey, we want to have a financial crisis too, which is very strange and, it doesn't really make much sense. But overall, you see, the growth, everybody thinks that India and China were great beneficiaries of the past boom. In fact, that's not true. The majority of the Indian population didn't gain from that boom. Actually, their livelihood conditions and employment got worse and more fragile. Real wages actually fell during the boom. Even in China, it's really arguable the extent to which the population has benefited because of the nature of that growth. It was a very unequal kind of growth. So we really have to move to a more equitable pattern of growth, which is also more sustainable, doesn't destroy our environment and our ecology in the same way. The first thing that we have to do in India, in China, across developing Asia, and across most of the developing world, is to move from an obsession with export-led growth to domestic market, and particularly to domestic wage-led growth. What we've done so far is we've all been competing with each other to sell more and more exports out there, which means we have to make our labor cheaper and cheaper. And that has been very counterproductive in the ways that I mentioned. So what we have to do is now focus on actually getting our demand from inside our economies. And that means putting more money in the hands of workers who will then demand many more. And because we have very large populations, we can do this. It can actually work as an effective growth strategy. But it also means that we have to do this in a way that it doesn't completely destroy the ecology. So we need to make sure that we're not creating unsustainable patterns of production and consumption. On the other hand, you know, half of our population still doesn't have access to electricity. I mean, we're talking about very, very basic conditions of life not being met. So if we just want to provide minimum conditions of life to all our people, basic housing, basic sanitation, electricity, school, health, you know, all of that, and nutrition, already we will be spending a vast amount creating a huge domestic market with a lot of, you know, positive fallout of that. That's the direction that we have to go, and we have to think of, if you like, greener and cleaner ways of doing that, ways that are sustainable over time.